Hey NBA 2K fans, it's John Markish of Real 2K Rosters. The NBA regular season's finally over, which means that the statistics are locked for the 10 non-playoff teams. I'm going to be updating my PS4 roster and using it as a vehicle to deliver my season recap and outlook for each team as they get eliminated. You could search Real 2K or my gamer tag Real 2K Insider on the PS4, and it should pop up. Alphabetically, the Sacramento Kings are the first eliminated team, so I decided to start with them. And just to recap what the Kings did this season, they finished with a 30-52 record, 12th in the Western Conference. They fired Luke Walton about a month into the season. He went 6-11, replaced him with Alvin Gentry, who went 24-41. And they had the 25th most efficient offense in the league and the 27th defense. Overall, pretty dismal season for them. They missed the playoffs for the 16th straight season, breaking the NBA record. And they let go of Alvin Gentry, as mentioned, the interim coach. They're going to be replacing him during the off season. The Kings go through coaches faster than anyone else in the NBA. They haven't made the playoffs since Rick Adelman coached the team, and they haven't made the playoffs before Rick Adelman coached the team either. So that's one of the interesting denominators. That just like this is how incompetent the whole organization has been. That really only one person has been able to get them to achieve success. So Walton's most notable decisions before he got the axe were he benched Marvin Bagley to start the year, opting for a smaller Harkless and Harrison Barnes front court, and he also chose to start Tyrese Halliburton over Buddy Hield. Starting Halliburton might have led to a decrease in De'Aaron Fox's play. We'll get to that in a minute, but I think that if the Kings were going to fire him a month into the season with a 6-11 record, they probably should have just replaced him before the season rather than letting him go through camp. Because once you're replacing the coach like a month into the year, how much traction are you really going to get if your supposed goal is making the playoffs? As far as their in-season transactions, they traded the aforementioned Tyrese Halliburton, Buddy Hield, Tristan Thompson, for Dimanta Sabonis, Justin Holiday, and Jeremy Lamb. There's Holiday and Lamb. The move was largely torched by NBA experts for the most part for being short-sighted, or at least like a short-term win-now move for a team that isn't anywhere close to being ready to win. When you factor in the future extension that Halliburton was going to sign, the team had like 7 more years of team control, whereas Sabonis only has 2 more years after this one before he becomes an unrestricted free agent. So, and also, like, Sabonis, he's a 2-time All-Star, but he also has some glaring weaknesses that limit his upside and, like, how you can build a team around him. We'll get to that once we go over. I'm going to go over everybody's badges and whatnot and focus on each player, how their season went, etc. So we'll touch more on that in a bit, but the other big trade they made was they traded Marvin Bagley for Dante DiVincenzo, Trey Lyles. Where is Lyles? Oh, he actually played well, so he's all the way up here. And Josh Jackson, who's all the way down here. They also waived Jamius Ramsey and Robert Woodard to complete the trade. It's a pretty good return for someone they had no desire to bring back in Bagley, and he was out of the rotation, like dating back to last year. The Kings got DiVincenzo for the second time. They originally wanted to trade for him in the Bogdan Bogdanovic sign-and trade that the NBA nixed. So the Kings, they're going to need him to grow into Halliburton's shoes for the Sabonis trade to work, and maybe that was one of the reasons why they were willing to let go of Halliburton. But it remains to be seen. Lyles, he's probably as good as Bagley at a fraction of the cost. He only makes $2.5 million next year, and Bagley is, I believe, a restricted free agent and was making like $10 million a year on top of that. So I think this was a great trade for the team, getting DiVincenzo and Lyles for for a guy who they really weren't interested in bringing back, and they picked up Josh Jackson, who ended up really just being like salary filler in the deal. He probably won't be back. He's a free agent. And I guess the only other move that they made during the season was they waived Louis King from a two-way contract, and they never brought in a replacement. This is a rebuilding team, and they only had one player on a two-way contract over the last like 2 months of the season. So, like, two-ways aren't the biggest deal in the world, but it just kind of highlights the organization dysfunction. Like, why would they not? It's not like two-way guys cost anything. So, focusing on what I changed in my roster, I basically doubled the total number of badges from the 2K roster. They have 128 badges in the 2K roster on the Sacramento Kings. I upped that number to 245, which is a plus 117. So I'm going to be reviewing the badges, etc. You can, of course, download the roster if you want to view them in detail. But let's start off with Dimanta Sabonis, 89 center. He became a full-time center with the Kings. He was starting at power forward next to Miles Turner for the last couple of years with the Pacers. And they obviously moved him, kind of choosing Miles Turner over him. And Sabonis, he was basically Turner's backup while with the Pacers a lot of the time. He played a lot of center even though he was starting at the 4. And he just became a full-time center with the Sacramento Kings, which is kind of weird because they immediately pushed Rishawn Holmes to the bench. And they also don't really have like any like depth in particular at the power forward. So I thought that was a little curious. They have so many centers. Even before the trade, they had 4 or 5 guys at center. Plus Sabonis, now bringing in Sabonis, they've got Rishawn Holmes making $10 million a year to be his backup. Holmes only played 15 minutes per game after the deal. But Sabonis, as I mentioned before, he's got some limitations. He's currently my 7th overall rated center in the game, but due to his limited defense, I would value players like Jarrett Allen, DeAndre Ayton, Robert Williams higher than him, just because the defense that they play, they're going to be able to fit into a team concept a lot easier. Whereas Sabonis, because he's so like offensive centric, he's basically just like a bad version of Nikola Jokic. Like, no, I wouldn't say bad. He's not a bad player by any stretch. Again, he is an all-star, but like he's a tier below, multiple tiers below Jokic. If you were gonna make him like the number 1 option on your team, like your ceiling's really like 45 wins. You can't build a championship contender around him because like how you a lot of teams rely on their center to be their rim protector, and that's part of why he was playing the 4 next to Miles Turner. The Kings don't have a rim protector aside from like Rishawn Holmes, who's really just like average at it. And when you look at like the power forwards that they got, the closest thing they have to like a two-way power forward would be like Chimezie Metu. Trey Lyles really isn't. Mo Harkless really is more of a 3 than a 4. Like it's going to be really hard for the Kings to get like a really good complement to Sabonis if they're going to be playing him at center. Realistically, a guy like honestly, the Nuggets, they have it like made with Aaron Gordon. I think Aaron Gordon is the perfect complement to a guy like Joker. He's a great rim protector. He can shoot the 3 ball a little bit. Great cutter to the rim to take advantage of Jokic's passing. And the Kings, they don't have anybody remotely close to Aaron Gordon, and like the guys like that in the league don't really grow on trees. As far as like in terms of guys who might be available this year, I think Kyle Anderson is a free agent, but he's nowhere near the athlete that a guy like Gordon is, or as a rim protector or anything. Draymond Greens, Jay Crowders, etc. Teams are locking those guys up and not letting them go. So we'll see. The Kings, we'll get to what they need a little later, but his usage went up slightly with the Kings. He was at 20% with the Pacers. That went up to like 25% with the Kings. He was basically the number 2 option after De'Aaron Fox. And it's worth noting that like the Kings, I think one of the reasons they made this decision to bring in Sabonis is historically in their franchise, like they've loved this player type. Chris Webber, Vlade Divac, Brad Miller, they've just always had like a good passing 5, or at least a good passing big men that they built their team around. So stylistically, that just might be something that they've internally preferred. But overall, like I think a guy like Halliburton is a lot easier to build around because you can fit him into any concept. It doesn't matter if he's like he can do a little volume creation. He can also be a spot up shooter. He's going to be able to develop into a better defensive player than I think Sabonis realistically can. And Sabonis is not a good shooter. You need to put the ball in his hands. He's not going to be able to be like a Kevin Love, gunning threes or anything like that. I think Kevin Love's actually a pretty reasonable comparison for Sabonis in terms of like Timberwolves Kevin Love. Sabonis isn't quite the same rebounder, but he is that level of like interior scorer. I've spoken a lot about his weaknesses and haven't really gone over any of his strengths. So let's get to that. Let's jump into his badges. Finishing, he shot 64. He had a 64 true shooting percentage this year, which ranked 10th in the NBA. He shot 74% at the rim despite a lack of athleticism. He's got excellent touch around the rim, excellent hands, good post player. He had the best foul draw rate of his career, though this actually got worse in Sacramento. Likely wasn't getting the same whistle, and like I said, great finisher around the basket, so I've got him at gold, grace under pressure. Focusing on his shooting, he's settled in as a 31 to 32% shooter who will take 2 per game. He's not really a threat. He's more in like that Anthony Davis tier rather than like a Nikola Jokic, where like he can hit it with his open when he's open, but it's not something that he's actively looking to do. And if anything, he actually shot the ball a little worse with the Kings compared to when he was with the Pacers. With the Pacers this year, he was taking like 3 threes per 36 minutes. With the Kings, that number basically cut in half to like 1.5 per 36, and he was only shooting like 22% on threes. Obviously, not a super high sample. He did get shut down, I believe, in March this year. So that's something that he's going to have to work on if he's going to be feeling like that Joker kind of heliocentric passing, a major offensive role on this team. He is a great passer. For a big man, 24 assist percentage. It was 41st in the NBA. 0.1% of Embiid to rank as like the second best passing center in the NBA. 4th best passing big, if we include Giannis and Julius Randle in that conversation as well. And also, I guess, actually 5th, Draymond Green also, But it's all the same. Great finisher, great passer for a big man, but never really much of a defender, which is part of the problem with him. His 89 overall is a little bit misleading. He is a great rebounder, but again, no rim protecting badges. You can see, not a good shot blocker. His 1.1 block percentage was lowest among centers in the NBA, at least starting centers. The next closest was Dwight Powell at 2%. But he was 16th in offensive rebound rate and 12th in defensive rebound rate. So I gave him a gold box out and silver worm as a result. Let's go over to De'Aaron Fox. 86 overall. The Kings needed him to make an all-star leap if they were going to make the playoffs this year, and instead he regressed on both ends at the age of 24, so kind of disappointing. As far as his career arc is going. Statistically, it was the second worst year of his career in the 5 years he's played. Position rank at 86, he's 16th among point guards in my roster, which is 8th in the Western Conference. He's basically in the same tier as like D'Angelo Russell, so he's, the competition at point guard is so tight that even if he ends up taking a leap, up to like Sabonis' 89, he's still only going to be like a top 5 point guard in the conference, much less the league. Point guard is the deepest position in the league by far. And we can just really briefly head over to my position averages. You can see 84 for a point guard is the highest among all positions. Centers are 83, small forwards 82, shooting guards 81. And power forwards 81. Yeah. So point guard talent is premium. So even though Fox is an 86, he's only 2 points better than the average starting point guard. So there's just lots of guys. They're going to need more quality across the rest of their roster. It's good. They got a good quarterback, but they need to fill out the rest of the team. And it's worth noting that he didn't play well until the team traded Tyrese Halliburton. Before the All-Star break, he was averaging 24 points, 5 rebounds, and 6 assists. Shot only 46% from the field, 27% from 3 in 48 games. And then post All-Star break, after they traded Halliburton, he started scoring a lot better. 29 points per game, 4 rebounds, 8 assists, 50% from the field, 37% from 3, and he did that in 11 games. So the playmaking went up with Halliburton gone, and he also was scoring the ball more. He seemed just kind of going through the motions. I think he thought that he was going to be traded rather than Halliburton at the deadline, so he was kind of or maybe he was just playing. Sometimes players dog it when they're angling for a trade. Guys like James Harden, etc., have been kind of known to do that, so that may have factored into Fox's subpar season as well. He's still a phenomenal finisher. 71% at the rim. This actually slipped from 76% last season. He's kind of like the what if Tony Parker played for the Kings instead of the Spurs, because he's a great finisher and really athletic slasher, but not a great 3-point shooter. He is a developing mid-range shooter though. As mentioned, the 3-ball is a work in progress, but his mid-range shooting improved substantially. He was 58 of 128 this year, which is 45% from 16 to 23 feet. Last season, in the 2021 season, he shot 36%, so 9% boost. And this year he was 74 of 249, 30% from 3. He was assisted only 55% of the time. So if he can get that up to 34 to 35% accuracy like John Morant, he'd contend for all-star teams. So we could say I've got him difficult shots, Hall of Fame, and circus threes, silver. Just because his 3-point shot rating is low at a 76 doesn't mean that he's necessarily a bad shooter, because again, he's doing so much off the dribble that depresses his percentage a bit. I believe I've got he's got bronze catch and shoot. He is a decent shooter when open. It's just that for point guards especially, they're not really catch and shoot guys. They do a lot off the dribble. Fox is not a good 3-point shooter, and half of his threes, 55%, are coming unassisted. So that's just something to keep in mind with him and other point guards when you rate them. Let's go on over to playmaking. He dropped to 28th in assist percentage this year. He was 17th last year. And the Kings were, that's a 26% assist rate. I believe last year it was 32, 33%. The Kings were only 25th offensively compared to 11th last season. So I downgraded his playmaking badges as a result. You can see I've got his dimer at bronze. And did I take away floor general? Did I? Hold on. Wait. I didn't mean to. Oh, no, wait. You know what? I meant to do that. Yeah, I took away floor general from him this year. His offensive box plus minus was not great, and the team, as mentioned, they only were 25th offensively, and I think that's a fairly reasonable removal, given that they didn't play well. If he goes back to doing what he did the past couple of years before this, I have no problem giving him back a bronze or silver floor general. And defense, this was his worst defensive season also probably as well. A career low 1.6 steal percentage, so I dropped his steal badges as a result, only bronzes across the board. Overall, the Kings really need him to play better and make the leap back to an 87, 88, 89 overall level player if they're going to make the playoffs next year. Going over to Harrison Barnes, who had probably what was the best season of his career. He started the season hot, averaging 23 and 10 in October as the small ball 4. He wasn't a high volume guy though, and the shooting percentages eventually went back to earth. And down the stretch after the trade deadline, he was starting at small forward next to Trey Lyles. He's probably more comfortable as a 4, but the quality wings are really hard to come by. Like, they don't have anybody else that can man the position, really, so it kind of is what it is. And I don't expect them to really be able to draw up, they're the Sacramento Kings. They're not going to be a big free agent draw. If they do sign somebody, it's probably somebody who's not very good and that they had to overpay for to begin with. So, although it's worth noting that a lot of people thought that about Barnes, and that he ended up being a pretty reasonable value on his contract, only making like $20 million a year. I think the perception was that he was a little bit overpaid, and now he's probably a little bit underpaid. He had the best foul draw rate of his career, which is not typical for a guy who's mostly a jump shooter and has eschewed his one-on-one play as the years have gone on. So I gave him gold, fearless finisher as a result. Shooting, he's quietly become one of the NBA's best catch-and-shoot players. 90th percentile on spot-ups this year, was 80th percentile the year before, so he's got gold catch-and-shoot. Worth noting that I'm not going to talk too much about what the 2K roster has done, because they really haven't done much this season, but Barnes is one of those players who he's had 7 badges the entire year, and they never bothered to update him at all. So he's definitely one of the bigger chain movers for me in the badge department, I would say, or at least one of the most important players to get a bunch of badges from top to bottom. Here's a quick look at what he's got for finishing. If you can believe it, he has like 1 finishing badge, which I can't remember exactly which one it is. I think it's Pro Touch, but I can't quite remember. So that's kind of wild to me. But going over his playmaking, he's not really like a volume shot creator anymore like he was with, like, say, the Dallas Mavericks, but he could still break out the skills when called upon. He's kind of like Tobias Harris, but a better shooter and an appropriate contract. Tobias Harris making like $30 million a year, Harrison Barnes making $20 million, as stated before. Defense, he's an okay man defender, but not like a defensive playmaker. He's got really low steal and block numbers, so kind of is what it is. That's partially why he probably plays better as a 4 than as a 3, because you kind of want your 3 to be a guy who can do a lot of switching and whatnot. And Barnes, at least as a 4, he can utilize his strength a little more. And let's go to Trey Lyles, who was the 4 down the stretch for this team. Career year for him, and a bounce back after barely playing for the Spurs the prior season. Where his stats at? Only 5 points per game with the Spurs. It was up to 10 points per game with the Kings. He established himself as a bench scorer for the Pistons prior to the Kings trade, and as mentioned, he joined the starting lineup almost immediately. He was a good post player, 1.9 post-ups per 36 minutes. Second on the team after Sabonis, who had 5 post-up possessions per 36. So I gave him some post badges. Probably makes more sense as a backup, as like a bench scorer, though, than he does as a starter, especially if they're going to be starting Sabonis. You don't need 2 post scorers who don't really do much defensively. So in that sense, he actually makes a perfect complement to Sabonis off the bench, I think, because certainly from like a shooting perspective, he's pretty erratic as a 3-point shooter. 34% for his career. He's shot 38% 3 times in his career, but he was down to 32% this season. He kind of alternates between like 38 and 32. So if he's going to shoot 38%, you can get away with starting him. He'd be a great floor stretcher, but like next to if he's only going to be at 32%, that's not really good enough. That's below league average. So you're not really helping your team at that point very much. All in all, though, he's a solid role player and a better fit than Marvin Bagley was, and it came at a fraction of the cost. Again, only makes $2.6 million next year on a team option. So Davion Mitchell is, I'll get to Holmes in a second. He was one of the bright spots for the Kings this year. Really their best backup throughout the year. The ninth overall pick. He was ninth among rookies in points per game, fourth in assists per game, and ninth in minutes per game. Should make the all-rookie second team. Averaged 14 points per game. Post All-Star break, he averaged 14 points and 6 assists in 32 minutes. As a starter, he averaged 18 points, 7 assists, in 37 minutes per game. Did that on 45, 34, 76 shooting. So that is worth noting. If the Kings, if he shows a leap next season, it might be time for the Kings to move on from De'Aaron Fox. That's going to be kind of like a wait and see type thing. They could also play the two together, which they did a lot this year. And I think that might have factored into like Mitchell's worst numbers as a backup, because when he was a backup, he was more or less like their Marcus Smart kind of like tenacious, just go all out on defense. Like his nickname is Off Night, and he would like frequently task himself with the guarding guys like Dame Lillard, etc. And because when guys go all out on defense, they don't save as much energy for offense. So maybe he was just like a little struggling with his shot. A lot of that also came earlier in the year where he was still feeling out the league. So kind of remains to be seen. But I'm expecting Mitchell to be a big part of the Kings moving forward. He's got 3 more years before he becomes a free agent, probably get an extension. He's probably their point guard of the future, to be honest. Although Fox does have 4 more years after this one on his deal. So, they might have to just make a decision at some point on those two, I think. Who knows? Maybe they'll trade they'll trade Mitchell halfway through next year too, like they did Halliburton. But going over to his badges and stuff, 64% at the rim he scored. Marcus Smart, for what it's worth, only had 2 seasons above 60%. So I already think that Mitchell is better than Marcus Smart in a lot of key areas, and probably has a higher ceiling as a result. So I gave him a bunch of finishing badges. Doesn't really have any in the 2K roster. He's another player where I think he has like 10 badges in the 2K roster, where I've got him up to like 29. Going over his shooting, he's a better shooter than Marcus Smart easily. He's 6 from mid-range this year. He already showed like way more than Marcus Smart ever has. 60 of 143 from mid-range, 42%. He's much better than your average rookie point guard. Those numbers are great for a rookie in general. And he's also well ahead of where Fox was at when he first entered the league. And it's worth noting that, he was a 4-year college player. He's only 1 year younger than Fox. So, he doesn't have a super high ceiling or anything. But so Marcus Smart, I jotted down his mid-range stats to make a comparison. Marcus Smart, the most makes he's ever had in a season were 22 from mid-range. So Mitchell had 60, already 3 times as many. Total in his career, he's hit 108 of 320, 34%. His 3-year total, 29 of 88, 33%. So half as many over the last 3 years that Mitchell had in this one. And then his 5-year total, Mitchell hit 60 this year from mid-range. Marcus Smart hit 61 mid-range shots over the last 5 years. 61 of 172, 35%, versus Mitchell's 42%. So this is why he's got the gold difficult shots, the silver circus threes. He's a pretty good shooter off the dribble already, and if he gets even better than that, he should be a starter on this team, I think. Whether they do that, whether they move Fox or start Mitchell at the 2 next to him, that kind of remains to be seen. But it's worth noting that, I don't think he makes a great 2 shooting guard, because he does all of that off the dribble. He's not really a guy like you would want spotting up. And he's not really a great playmaker, only 22% assist rate. He played a lot of shooting guard, it's worth noting, especially in the first half of the year next to Tyrese Halliburton. He averaged 12 assists per game in the last 5 games of the season, but was below average overall. So I don't read too much into the gaudy stat lines that happen in April, when teams have stopped trying and they're playing funky lineups and stuff. But he at least showed that if he has to be the starting point guard for an extended period, he can facilitate and he's probably he ain't gonna average anywhere close to 12 assists per game, but he's probably better than like the 22 assist percentage. That's below average for like a starting point guard. The average starting point guard would probably be like 28%. I want to say. Actually, can I? What's this? What is the average pass vision in my roster? There we go. 77 pass vision. That's about like a 25. No. Sorry, 26, 27% assist rate. So yeah, basically what I said. But we've talked about his all of his other. He's still growing here, but as far as defense goes, he's a finished product. One of the best defenders in the NBA already. Like I said before, his nickname was Off Night. Man defense is his calling card. You can see I gave him gold clamps and pick dodger, based on like the synergy data that he put up. Surprisingly low steal and block numbers though, but he does stay in front of his man. And yeah, also worth noting, I gave him a silver intimidator among the leaders in like opponent's field goal percentage, or not leaders, but his opponents shoot low percentage against him, however you want to phrase that. Going over to Rishawn Holmes, he had kind of a disappointing year. Was the starter at the start of the year, regressed slightly from the year before, and he fell completely off the map as soon as the Kings got Sabonis. As a starter in 37 games, he averaged 12 points per game, 8 rebounds, and 26 minutes per game. 71% true shooting, so he's a pretty good finisher, and like close to a double-double. But as a backup in 8 games, 4 points per game, 3 rebounds, only 15 minutes per game, and only 50 true shooting. So not only did he play fewer minutes after the trade, but he was also significantly less effective. And I don't know if like maybe he was sulking with the move to the bench, or they were struggling to, he wasn't with the starters anymore, wasn't getting the same looks with the bench unit. He was also dealing with some personal issues. He missed the last month of the season as he stepped away from the team, so he might have had also stuff going on at home that were limiting his effectiveness. But all in all, like, I don't think the Kings are like upset with him or anything, but he's probably very likely to be traded, given that they have Sabonis locked up, and like they don't need his backup to be making $10 million. They can move him for another. They need help at other positions. Obviously, they have they're loaded at the center position. They're the only team in the league that has a fifth-string center. And that was even before they got Sabonis, because they traded Tristan Thompson for Sabonis. So they really didn't need all those guys to begin with. If anything, I think they actually signed Tristan Thompson as like insurance. Like they thought that Holmes was gonna not re-sign with them, and then he ended up actually re-signing with them. But I think they can trade the asset, but they're gonna need to do it soon, because he's not going to be able to build his trade value if he's only getting 15 minutes per game off the bench. Also worth noting that like Damien Jones played pretty well. They probably prefer him on a cheaper deal. Like he's only going to be making close to the minimum, like $2 to $3 million on his next contract probably. They also have Alex Len under contract, although that's certainly not obviously Holmes is a better player than both of those guys, but they just have center locked up. They need help at other positions. So like I looked around the league, and teams like the Lakers, Knicks, Thunder, Warriors, they could all make some sense. They have all gaping holes at center. Just to briefly look at them, the Knicks have Mitchell Robinson's a free agent. Taj Gibson is old. Nerlens Noel's always hurt. So if Mitchell Robinson doesn't re-sign, they could find maybe a taker. Maybe they swap like Kemba Walker up in Fournier, a couple other guys. The Lakers obviously have nobody. Davis prefers to play the 4 rather than the 5. Dwight Howard, old AF. The Thunder, the Thunder is just always willing to take on a contract. The positions here don't matter. They could just swap like Derek Favors or something for him if they're going to get like draft picks or whatnot. They might have actual interest in playing a guy like Holmes or not. We'll see. But and the Warriors, of course. James Wiseman, who knows what they're ever going to get from him. Nemanja Bjelica is their backups 5, and Kevon Looney is the worst starting center in the NBA for the last 3 years already. So I think those are the 4 teams where Holmes might make sense. But going over his badges. Finishing, still a great finisher. 77% at the rim. Solid touch on his floater, so I gave him a silver teardropper. He was 56% from 3 to 15 feet, so pretty effective at that. Doesn't really do much scoring. He does have 3-point range, sort of. He hit a couple threes. He was taking threes a couple years ago, but with the Kings, he's really just settled into an interior player. It's probably for the best. Doesn't do a ton of playmaking at all, really. Really just a roll man finisher. And defense, he's an okay defender. I think bronze is appropriate level for all of his badges. His 3.3 block percentage this year was the second lowest of his career. So I dropped his rim protector from silver to bronze. It's worth noting. The Kings were only 27th defensively this year. So even though Holmes is probably one of their more valuable defensive players, I think everybody just kind of declined across the board. Terence Davis, he had a pretty solid season. Career year for him, his third NBA season. Was cut short by injury, though. Only played 30-something games. He had wrist surgery in January. Jeremy Lamb took over his role post-deadline. Jeremy Lamb is a free agent, so I expect Terence Davis to kind of reclaim his spot in the rotation. It's worth noting that even though I've got his position at shooting guard, he played mostly small forward next to Fox and Halliburton, and I really only have him at the 2 based on the current team depth chart. That'll change once I get to the end of this. I'm going to show you guys kind of a projection for next season, but I would pencil him in next season as the backup small forward with Holiday and DiVincenzo around. As Holiday, he joined the starters as soon as he hit the team, and they're obviously going to give big minutes to DiVincenzo, and I expect them to still want to play Davis, given that He's one of the only shooters on the team since they traded Buddy Hield. He led the Kings with 10 threes per 36 minutes. Not 10 threes made, but 10 threes attempted. He averaged 21 points per 36 minutes, so volume shooter silver makes a lot of sense. And he does a lot of three-point shooting off the dribble, so he's got gold circus threes. Playmaking, he's a reasonable secondary playmaker, or secondary ball handler, I want to say. I believe 30% of his possessions were pick and rolls, so that played into his circus threes. As again, he does a lot of pick and roll scoring and a lot of shooting threes off the dribble, so you can imagine how he's getting those. And pretty reasonable defender. Undersized, though, as a 3 at only 6'4", but that's kind of the direction that the league is trending anyway. But it just kind of also goes to show the lack of depth that the Kings have at the 3 in general. And they just wanted to get him on. They had Fox and Halliburton to start the year, and they had so many other 2 guards also, with Hield and Davis were basically the backup small forwards on this team for much of the year. And I expect that to continue next year. Now that they got Justin Holiday, who 77 shooting guard, they acquired him at the deadline. He started 65 games on the year. He's been a starter for the last couple of years. Probably if not the worst starting shooting guard in the NBA. Probably in the bottom 3 consistently, but that doesn't mean he's bad, just the least talented guy. This is a position where you're typically going to find a lot of your 6 men, guys like Jamal Crawford, Jordan Clarkson, etc. There was a Jordan Crawford, right? There was a Joe Crawford. There were so many. I can't remember, but I've forgotten more basketball than most people have ever known. So, but regardless, he's kind of the modern day Keith Bogans. Really just a 3-and-D guy. So pretty valuable role player. You want those guys to start next to your high volume point guards. So certainly pretty valuable. He's not a good finisher at all. So you could see 10 shooting badges instead. He had a career high 177 threes this year. He's hit 807 over the last 5 years. So like I mentioned, he's in that Keith Bogans role. And he's probably going to continue to start unless Dante DiVincenzo takes a major step forward. And like mentioned, he is a pretty reasonable defender. So as far as DiVincenzo, 77 shooting guard, kind of a down year for him. He missed the first 34 games of the year, recovering from ankle surgery. When he was drafted, he was an elite athlete. I think the injuries have kind of hindered his development over the last 4 years and kind of sapped a little bit of his potential. He does have sleeper potential, though. He just needs to stay healthy, but he is already 25. Worth noting that his shooting line with Milwaukee was 33% from the field, 28% from three, as he was returning from injury. He had ankle surgery during the playoffs, so he won a ring, but didn't really get to participate in the playoff run that Milwaukee had. And when he joined the Kings, he shot 36% from the field, and at least got his three ball up to 37%. Those numbers are just down across the board from last season, where he shot 42% from the field and 38% from three. So he was primarily a jump shooter this year, and a 6% drop in his overall field goal percentage means that he really wasn't doing much finishing at the rim. He's got 0 finishing badges, which is kind of I not something I would have expected, because he had great athleticism coming out of college. He was kind of like a Zach LaVine caliber athlete, but as Zach LaVine, obviously a much better finisher than DiVincenzo ended up being. Shooting wise, I talked about his shooting, so he's got bronzes across the board, and he just needs to continue doing this for the most part. If he can improve his efficiency just a little bit more, the Kings would love that, because they are desperate for shooting right now. But realistically, the main path for him to improve as a player is to get his finishing back up, to kind of separate himself from Justin Holiday, because that's only going to make him a more deadly playmaker. He is a pretty solid playmaker. The Bucks would run him as a point guard a lot of the time, but because he doesn't have a solid floater or anything like that, it kind of limits the damage that he can do on this end. And one of the reasons the Kings like him so much is he is a good defender. He plays really hard. Obviously, he had a different role. Or not a different role, but he was playing with the Milwaukee Bucks in their starting lineup as the fifth man, surrounded by offensive talent. So his job was to go all out on defense. So he's still going to do that with the Kings, but he's got a little more leeway to have a larger offensive role, but that also might lead to less energy for him on the defensive end. But overall, he had a 2.7 steal percentage with the Sacramento Kings, which was up from 1.5% with the Bucks. As mentioned, he was coming back from injury with the Bucks. I expect his steal ratings to his steal rate to kind of be in that range. And if that's the case, that silver will become a gold, I think, for sure. I do already have him as a gold ball stripper, gold hustler. He led the Kings with 3.4 deflections per 36 minutes. So, yeah, those are the two badges that I really wanted to focus on with him. Going over to the, let's do. Yeah, Chimezie Metu is the next guy I do want to talk about. 76 power forward. He also had a career year, establishing himself as a backup power forward in his 4th NBA season after kind of riding the bench his first 3 years. He's a better defender than Trey Lyles, so he's a pretty reasonable handcuff, but neither player really should be a starter. As far as Metu's game, he's one of the better finishers on the team, probably the best lob threat after Holmes on the team. He led the Kings with 63 dunks, so I do have him as a silver Lob City finisher. And shooting, he doubled the three-point attempt rate, but similar to Lyles, only 31%, so he's not really a true stretch option. If he could increase his efficiency from there, he would probably earn a starting job and a lot more money than what he's currently slated to make. He's on a non-guaranteed deal. Is going to make like $2 million next year. In fact, let me actually contract because there is no way that they're not guaranteeing this. Only 1.9 million. Yeah, like kind of a no-brainer for a player that was in their rotation for much of the year. And defensively, he's a pretty great rebounder. Or pretty great. I say pretty great. Not a good offensive rebounder, but a very good defensive rebounder. So I gave him a box bronze. He had 26 defensive rebound percentage, was second on the Kings. If he continues doing that, I'll probably bump that up to a silver. But going over to Damien Jones, yet another King who had a career year for all intents and purposes. Not that it really mattered in terms of for the wins column, but the Kings believed in him. They carried him on the roster as the fourth center amid league-wide laughter and scrutiny. And he eventually got development time when the team shut Sabonis down. In 15 starts this year, he averaged 14 points per game, 6 rebounds, 2 assists per game, 27 minutes, and had a 77 true shooting percentage. He projects, I think, as next season's backup with the Holmes trade likely. Finishing, it's always been his calling card. He's been an elite role man ever since he's been in the NBA. It's part of why the Kings kind of wanted to take a flyer on him. If he can develop the rest of his skills, he'll be a legit player. But yeah, consistently he was 90. He's been 90th percentile in like role man finishing for basically his entire career. So I gave him gold brick wall as a result of that. This does a lot of different things, but increasing the effectiveness of his screens I figured was the most important thing. And shooting wise, he developed his jumper 14 of 27 from mid-range and 10 of 29 from 3. Compare that to last season, he was 2 for 10 combined outside of 16 feet last season. This season he was 24 of 56. So way better as a shooter. If that's legit, I could give him a couple more badges, maybe catch and shoot or something. The volume wasn't really there for me to give him catch and shoot, but if it continues, he might get something, or maybe at least like a higher set shooter badge or something like that. I didn't really watch any of his games. I don't know how open he's left on some of these threes. I would imagine pretty fucking open because nobody. Nobody thinks of Damien Jones as a three-point shooter. It's like leaving It's like leaving Dwight Howard open. Dwight Howard shot a ridiculous three-point percentage this year. But it's like he did it all in garbage time, and if Dwight Howard wants to hit a three, whatever, who cares? Like you'll live with that. Cool. But yeah, mostly known for his defense. He's a pretty good rim protector. On top of that, so realistically, he's a good rim protector, but not a great help defender, I think. He still has to work on like his defensive IQ, things like that, in order to really become like a true secondary backup. If he's going to be the backup to Sabonis, he's really got to work on his defense, I think, especially since Sabonis is not a great defender himself. Let's go to Mo Harkless, who saw most of his time this year as a small ball 4. Next to Harrison Barnes. Well, I say small ball 4, but realistically, like he was the 3 and Harrison Barnes was the 4. But for like the purposes of 2K, like the way that they handle rotations, it makes sense for him to be a 4 instead, because basically when Harkless didn't start, either Lyles or Metu was the starter. Like Barnes was always the starter, and if you put Harkless as a small forward, he's never going to play next to Barnes. So, like, it's one of those things where, like, if you were going to have Harkless in the starting lineup with Barnes, you would probably want to switch Harkless to the 3 and, like, Barnes to the 4, but, like, for the entire season, like, this is what you need to have him at in order to get your desired result. It's probably not going to matter a ton next season, but we'll get to that. He only played 6 games after the All-Star break, kind of as a result, because like I mentioned before, they got Trey Lyles and they ran with him in the starting lineup. He started 20 games for the Kings at the end of the year. And the problem with Harkless is he's not good enough of a shooter to like justify him as a small forward. Like you can't really you can't play him next to guys like Lyles and Maytu because they're only 30% 3-point shooters themselves. So you can get away with it with Barnes because he's the best shooter on the team, but not with these guys. And certainly they don't have any like again we mentioned Damien Jones' 3-point shooting. That kind of doesn't count. Like it's not great. They don't have a true floor stretching big man on this team, so you can't really play Harkless as a 3. This is also why Josh Jackson didn't get much playing time, but we'll get to that in a second. So I do think that Harkless is still a solid defender, but he's just not good enough of a shooter to play real small forward minutes anymore on a team that doesn't have shooting at the 4. So I think he's a pretty reasonable trade candidate. Like he makes a lot more sense on a contender, I think, than he does on like a team like the Kings, who's like struggling to make the playoffs. But then again, actually, maybe this is the perfect team for them because they're not like a tanking team. They are trying to like go all in for the 8th seed, and a contending team, like they're just going to have better players than Mo Harkless. So it kind of is what it is at this point. But yeah, I'm still very high on him as a defensive player, but it his career really took a turn when he shot like 38%, I think, or 37% one year with the Blazers, but ever since then, like that kind of ended up being like an outlier rather than something that he was able to build on. It's kind of unfortunate. He's also at 28, he doesn't have quite the same athleticism that he did earlier in his career, so once that slips, it might be a little bumpy for him in his age 30 years. But Josh Jackson, as mentioned before, his 3-point shooting, that slipped to a career low of 25%. He played mostly with the Pistons this year. Only played 123 minutes with the Kings, was largely a throw-in in the deal. He only shot 35% with the Kings. I've been high on Jackson, or I don't want to say high, but I believe in his ability. Like he's better than he's rotation caliber. You know what I mean? He's a former number 4 pick. I liked him when he was with the Grizzlies. Like he spent the entire year in the G League, or not the entire year, but like the first 4 months of the year in the G League to kind of like rehab his value after getting let go by the Suns earlier. But he's entering his age 25 season. This could be his last chance. He's a pretty good defensive player. He's a pretty good mid-range scorer, but really as a wing, you need to be able to hit the 3. And he's not efficient enough as a volume scorer in order to really be like somebody you'd want to put the ball in their hands as like a 6-man scorer or anything like that. So like I think he could be playing in China, dominating the Chinese league in like 2 years or something like that. But I think there is going to be a team that will take a flyer on him. Alex Len, likewise another former lottery pick, former number 5 pick. Played a career low 39 games this year, but he's a steady backup, and he only played 6 games post All-Star break as the team was showcasing Damien Jones. So he kind of is what he is at this point. He's a reasonable finisher, reasonable rim protector, good rebounder, screen setter. There was a year where he was hitting 3s with the Hawks, but similarly, that kind of ended up being an outlier. That hasn't been something that he's really done in volume over the last couple of years. He has 3-point range, but like teams aren't not good enough to really like utilize him as a top scorer or anything. And finishing off, we got Ninias Cuenta, the only 5th string center in the NBA. He's on a 2-way deal. It's kind of like whatever. He played well in the G League. They drafted him. Well, he's undrafted here, but I think he was the 39th pick last season. He's basically being groomed as a second string, 3rd string in the future. He'll probably be back on a 2-way deal next year. Like 2-way deals really don't matter that much, but they matter enough to where like they should have signed a second player to a 2-way deal. I don't know what they were doing there. So let's go do their offseason outlook. Unrestricted free agents. We've got Jeremy Lamb, Josh Jackson, and Damien Jones. I'm going to release Jeremy Lamb to free agency and Josh Jackson to free agency. I don't expect those guys to be back. Lamb was okay, but he's like entering his age 30 season. He's probably going to look to be joining a contender. and they don't have a ton of minutes available for him. So we're going to move Terence Davis over to the 3 to kind of make up for that. Like I mentioned before, he did mostly play the 3 last season. So that's going to shore up their depth chart a little bit. Restricted free agent, Dante DiVincenzo, he'll likely be back. Obviously, the Kings were targeting him for a very long time. So they're going to have $15 million in cap room. I expect, like, DiVincenzo will probably sign for half of that, I want to say. I don't know. Because he's restricted, I don't know what kind of offers he would really get. They really don't get too many offer sheets in restricted free agency. It's mostly just sign and trades, but I don't anticipate the Kings are going to be looking to do that. So yeah, I expect he'll be back. So they'll probably have like $7 million, $8 million for to sign to re-sign Damien Jones and then fill in the team with like another $5 million level player. Trey Lyles has a team option that will almost assuredly be exercised, as he was a bargain. Chimezie Metu is on a non-guaranteed deal. As I saw before, I totally exercised that. That should be fully guaranteed by January or whatever. And yeah, so pretty quiet. For not too much going on. They are pretty set rotation-wise. I am going to push. Let's put Mo Harkless back at the 3 to kind of get a better idea of their like true depth chart. I do consider him still more of a wing than a big. So as far as needs go, what they need to do is they need to trade Rishawn Holmes, and like their depth chart is more or less fine, and get in a power forward, preferably a 3-and-D level guy. They do have 3 draft picks. They've got 1 first-rounder projected to be the 7th overall pick, and then 2 second-rounders, the 37th and the 49th. So yeah, I would say their biggest needs this offseason are a 3-and-D power forward, and then a bounce-back season from De'Aaron Fox and Dante DiVincenzo. If they can get all 3 of those things, the Kings might be able to push for the 8th seed, or at least the play-in, finally, to end their playoff-less drought. So that's going to wrap up my season recap and outlook for the Sacramento Kings. Keep an eye out for the next team recap video. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on that. It's worth noting that the Hornets and Spurs were eliminated tonight in their respective play-in games, so they will join the cadre of teams to do recaps for. I think I haven't decided what team I'm going to go with. It's either going to be like the Knicks or the Hornets, probably. The Hornets were eliminated today, and the Knicks are just the next team alphabetically, so I'll figure that out. But in the meantime, please hit that like button if you like that, if you enjoyed this video, want to see more roster content. And yeah, hit me up if you got any ideas, give me feedback, etc. Because this was fun for me, and I'd like to do more content like this again soon. And thanks for watching and listening, or thanks for, what the hell did I say? Thanks for watching and listening. I am terrible at outros, so I'll catch y'all later. Peace.